A short, four-sentence memo signed behind closed doors in Ottawa's sealed cabinet room has sent global markets into sudden paralysis. On July 8, 2025, Canada enacted its first official restriction on U.S. access to its foreign procurement markets since the inception of NAFTA in 1994. The policy bans all federal-level procurement from any U.S.-based company that does not operate on Canadian soil. Within hours, $14.8 billion in U.S. contracts were frozen. These weren't symbolic casualties. They were operational disruptions. Calgary's transit expansion abruptly lost its American electrical system supplier. Hydrocheck halted payments mid-invoice to an Oklahoma-based turbine manufacturer. In Toronto, Joe Rail blamed new supplier integrity protocols for delays. Within just 6 hours, the Canadian dollar surged 1.3% and the S&P TSX Industrials Index rose 2.1%, signaling rising domestic confidence and deepening foreign concern. Donald Trump was briefed at 4:42 a.m. Washington time. Reports say he slammed the table hard enough to topple a coffee mug emblazoned with America First. Canada's retaliation had arrived, unanticipated in its form, timing, and scope. The move may have rewritten the rules of North American economic confrontation. Just over a month earlier, on June 4th, Trump had doubled tariffs on steel and aluminum to 50%, citing Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act under the guise of national security. But the reality was more controversial. 41% of U.S. steel imports came from allies like Canada, Mexico, and the EU, now reclassified as economic threats. It was effectively the U.S. using Cold War-era provisions against NATO's founding members. Canada had several options: file a WTO complaint, rally G7 allies, or open quiet diplomatic channels with Washington. It chose none. Instead, Prime Minister Mark Carney unveiled a bold new trade doctrine. Protest would be replaced by exclusion. His rationale was clear. If the U.S. insists on penalizing Canadian metals, then Canada would deny U.S. companies access to the infrastructure projects shaping its industrial future. Washington's powerful steel lobby didn't see it coming. Neither did Boeing, which had just secured a $2.4 billion Canadian airframe parts deal. At 9:12 a.m. Eastern, as markets opened, Boeing received its cancellation notice. Its stock plunged 5.1% within the hour. Dubbed the Reciprocal Access Framework, the policy requires that any foreign company bidding on Canadian public contracts must have at least half of its manufacturing base in Canada or in a formal free trade agreement partner country. There are no exemptions, not for defense, energy, or long-established U.S. suppliers. Compliance is strict. Origin traceability to prevent backdoor routing, domestic labor ratio audits, and raw material sourcing certifications. All bidders undergo quarterly reviews. Fail once and you're shut out. This isn't a tariff. It's outright market denial. And with Canada's public procurement sector worth over $120 billion annually, the long-term impact could dwarf any short-term customs duties. Ironically, the blueprint comes from the U.S. itself. In 2018, Trump signed Executive Order 13881, mandating maximum use of American-made iron and steel in federal procurement, a pillar of U.S. economic nationalism. Canada has now adapted that model into its own build domestic first rule. More paradoxically, Ottawa is using the very same Section 232 national security clause Trump once invoked, except Canada is still technically complying with its free trade obligations. Trade experts at McGill University argue Canada hasn't just retaliated, it's changed the rules entirely. Unlike traditional tit-for-tat tariffs, Canada's framework includes built-in incentives. Ottawa has launched an $11.2 billion co-financing fund for any foreign firm willing to relocate production to Canadian soil. And it's already paying off. South Korea's POSCO signed a memorandum to move cold-rolled steel processing to Ontario. Siemens have begun exploring a new power technology plant in Manitoba. The aim isn't just retaliation. It's industrial migration. Canada is turning exclusion from U.S. markets into a magnet for reindustrialization. This is not a trade war. It's a strategic realignment powered by legislation, capital, and precise timing. U.S. domestic suppliers without a Canadian footprint are bearing the brunt. Meanwhile, U.S. headquartered multinationals like GE, Ford, and GM, with established Canadian operations, still qualify. German firms like Bosch, already operating in Kitchener, landed a $64 million contract just 2 days after new policy went into effect. Japanese manufacturer Komatsu is fast-tracking compliance, while China watches closely, silent but clearly attentive. In effect, Canada has penalized its primary trade adversary while redistributing opportunities to more agile competitors capable of navigating its strict rules of origin requirements. In Washington, Trump's team had expected Mexico to denounce Ottawa's move. Instead, President Claudia Sheinbaum remained neutral, asserting Mexico's sovereign right to define its own industrial policy. The European Union responded with quiet precision, accelerating its 2030 Green Steel Accord and inviting Canadian firms into joint venture negotiations. Finnish stainless steel supplier Outokumpu even launched a feasibility study for a new production facility in Nova Scotia. Meanwhile, at the WTO, the U.S. filed a complaint accusing Canada of unjustified market discrimination. Canada responded by pointing directly to Washington's own Section 232 tariffs as precedent. Hearings have been delayed, as the tribunal weighs how national security exceptions apply to bilateral procurement, a process expected to take over 14 months. In short, multilateralism has stalled. Bilateral exclusion stands. And for now, time favors Canada. Economic shockwaves are already reverberating through the U.S. Midwest. As of July 9th, the American Iron and Steel Institute reported a 9.3% week-over-week decline in crossbar orders. Oshkosh Defense warned of potential layoffs due to a frozen contract in British Columbia. Steel Dynamics paused expansion plans in Indiana, citing instability in North American procurement markets. Even firms technically compliant with Canada's new rules are growing uneasy. Ford's Canadian operations meet the localization threshold, but several Michigan-based suppliers that feed those plants may soon be disqualified unless they relocate production. Republican governors in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin are now demanding clear retaliation, but the Trump administration is holding firm on its tariffs, at least until new downstream exemptions can be drafted. For Prime Minister Mark Carney, this is not protectionism, it's protection. At his July 8 press conference, he clarified, "We're not closing our markets, we're conditioning access to them. If the United States puts up a barrier, we adjust our alignment in real time." That framing is crucial. By using procurement rules and investment incentives instead of blunt tariffs, Canada avoids direct WTO violations while preserving strategic leverage. As the Financial Times put it, the approach resembles economic aikido, redirecting an opponent's force rather than meeting it head-on. Still, critics at home warn that cutting off long-standing U.S. suppliers could trigger downstream shortages, particularly in sectors like rail and heavy construction. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce has lobbied for dual compliance exceptions for hybrid U.S.-Canadian firms. But Ottawa isn't budging, and this highlights a deeper contradiction. North American supply chains were built to be seamless, cross-border, and optimized for efficiency. Now, they're being relabeled by nationality. When Washington designates Canadian steel a security threat and Ottawa treats U.S. suppliers as non-domestic, the result isn't sovereignty, it's fragmentation. The very integration that the USMCA was designed to preserve is now being dissected for strategic gain. Both sides claim to be defending industrial resilience, but the real question is whether this new fragmentation strengthens the system or quietly dismantles a competitive advantage North America once held. Steel and aluminum were just a trigger. The larger experiment lies in whether access to markets will now hinge on political alignment, local presence, and traceable supply chains. Early indicators suggest confidence in Canada's direction. Australia is exploring similar localization rules. India is studying procurement nationalization as a counterweight to U.S. tariffs. Ironically, by trying to wall off foreign materials, Washington may have triggered a global rethink of trade norms, one where allies no longer assume free access, but must actively earn it. So, what's your take? Is Canada's steel firewall a forward-looking model for 21st century industrial protection, or the start of dangerous unraveling of global supply logic? Will allies follow Canada's lead, or will a spiral of retaliation break the system apart?